You were taught to care from the very beginning. They told you to be nice, to be agreeable, to make others comfortable. You were told to follow the rules, to not rock the boat, to say yes when you wanted to scream no. You were taught that being liked is everything, that fitting in is survival, that approval is currency. And so you started caring a lot about what people thought, about being good enough, about being accepted, validated, applauded. You learned to read the room before you even learned to read your own feelings. You smiled when you didn't mean it. You apologized when you weren't wrong. You shrank so others wouldn't feel insecure around your light. You said yes when your soul screamed no. You gave too much, too often, to too many, and you called it kindness. But it wasn't kindness, it was fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being too much or not enough. You didn't care because you were generous. You cared because you were terrified. Terrified of being left out, misunderstood, unseen. You thought that if you just tried a little harder, bent a little more, people would finally give you the love you were starving for. But they didn't. Because the truth is, people don't love you for how much you care. They love you when you love yourself enough to stop caring about the wrong things. And that shift, that breaking point, it comes like a storm. One day you wake up and you're exhausted, not from doing too much, but from pretending too much, pretending you're okay with being overlooked, pretending their opinions don't hurt, pretending the praise is enough to fill the emptiness you feel when you're alone. You hit that silent wall, and something cracks. You stop. You breathe. You question. Why do I care so much about what people think of me? Why do I give them the power to define who I am? And in that moment, something powerful begins. It's not rebellion. It's resurrection. It's not bitterness. It's clarity. You start seeing the lies you've lived by. You realize that most people are too busy caring about themselves to really care about you. You realize that the people you've been killing yourself to impress, half of them don't even notice. The other half wouldn't clap for you unless it benefited them. And suddenly, the weight starts to lift. You start to wonder what your life would look like if you stopped trying to manage everyone else's perception. What would happen if you stopped explaining yourself, defending yourself, performing for acceptance? What if your worth didn't depend on someone else's comfort level with your truth? That's when everything begins to shift. You stop apologizing for your boundaries. You stop shrinking in rooms where you used to play small. You stop answering calls that drain you. You stop explaining decisions that weren't made for other people's approval. You stop pretending you don't want more. You stop pretending you're okay with less. Because when you stop caring about the noise, you start hearing your own voice again. That voice you buried beneath the pressure. That voice that remembers who you are. And the world starts to respond differently, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to be, but because you're finally real. Real is rare, and people can feel it. They don't always know what changed, but they feel the shift. The energy is different. You're not chasing, you're not explaining, you're not begging to be seen. You are seen because you see yourself. And that changes everything. The moment you stop caring about being liked is the moment you start being respected. The moment you stop chasing love is the moment you start attracting truth. The moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment people start listening differently. You begin to command the room, not with your volume, but with your presence. because people can't ignore someone who's no longer seeking permission to exist. And this doesn't mean you become cold or hard or closed off. It means you become whole. You become discerning. You become sovereign. You realize that your peace is your responsibility, and no one else has the right to mess with it. You begin to care about deeper things, not their approval, but your alignment. Not being invited, but being in integrity. Not being chosen, but choosing yourself every single time. And that's when real life begins. The moment you stop caring isn't the end of your kindness. It's the beginning of your freedom. You don't even notice it at first, the way caring too much slowly chips away at your power. It starts small. You hesitate before speaking, wondering if what you say will offend someone. You overanalyze a text you just sent, rereading it 5 times, worried it sounded too cold or too desperate. You replay a conversation in your head, picking apart your tone, your timing, your facial expression, hoping you didn't come across the wrong way. And suddenly, you're not living anymore. You're managing perception, managing reactions, managing approval. You're not in your own story. You're stuck in everyone else's script, trying to make sure you don't upset the plot. And that's how power leaks out, not in dramatic moments, but in the quiet, daily betrayals of your own soul. Every time you silence yourself to avoid judgment, you give your power away. Every time you shapeshift to be accepted, you hand someone else the blueprint to control you. Every time you prioritize someone else's comfort over your truth, you shrink. And eventually, you forget who you were before you started molding yourself into who you thought they wanted. Caring too much isn't compassion. It's a trap, a slow, invisible erosion of your fire. Because when you care too much about being liked, you abandon your edge. You soften your voice. You dilute your presence. You second-guess your instincts. You become polite when you were meant to be powerful. You become quiet when you were built to shake the room. You become palatable when you were made to be unforgettable. And people feel that. They may not be able to articulate it, but they sense it. They sense that you're not really free. They sense that you're trying too hard. And ironically, the more you try to be liked, the less they respect you. Because there's nothing magnetic about self-abandonment. People don't follow those who need approval. They follow those who carry conviction. And that's what you lose when you care too much. Your conviction, your clarity, your center. You start asking questions that don't belong in your mouth. Am I too much? Should I tone it down? Is it okay to want more? You look to others for permission. You wait for green lights that only you can give yourself. And that waiting keeps you small, keeps you stuck, keeps you spinning. Because here's the truth no one tells you. The more you care about what people think, the easier it is to control you. Approval becomes a leash. Opinions become chains. You become predictable, manipulatable, fragile. And the worst part? You don't even see it. Because you've been told that caring is noble, that being agreeable is the same as being kind, that keeping the peace is more important than being in your power. But peace without power is just silence. And kindness without boundaries is self-destruction. If you want to reclaim your power, you have to get brutally honest. What are you doing just to be liked? What parts of yourself have you buried because someone else found them too loud, too intense, too different? Who are you still trying to impress, and why do their opinions carry so much weight in your life? You see, the more power you give away, the more lost you feel. And the more lost you feel, the more you chase external validation to fill the gap. It's a loop, a cycle, a prison. But the key is always in your pocket. And it starts with a decision to care less. Not in a bitter, cold, dismissive way, but in a powerful, intentional, liberating way. You start caring less about being liked and more about being real. You start caring less about keeping everyone happy and more about keeping yourself honest. You start caring less about fitting in and more about standing out in truth. And with every boundary you draw, with every no you say, with every truth you speak, you begin to reassemble your power. You begin to remember that you're not here to be chosen. You're here to choose. You're not here to be tolerated. You're here to be honored. You're not here to perform. You're here to live fully, loudly, unapologetically. And that kind of living can't coexist with the fear of judgment. You have to pick your truth or their comfort, your soul or their applause, your alignment or their approval, because power is not found in being accepted. It's found in being authentic. The world doesn't need more people who blend in. It needs people who stand in their fire. And that fire comes alive the moment you stop caring about who it might make uncomfortable. You want your power back? Let go of the need to be liked. Watch what happens when you stop performing. When you stop watering yourself down, when you stop tiptoeing around opinions that were never rooted in truth anyway, you become untouchable. Not because you're arrogant, but because you're grounded. You know who you are. And you don't need confirmation to act like it. That's not rebellion. That's self-respect. And it's the most powerful energy you can walk into any room with. There comes a moment that doesn't announce itself. It's not loud. It doesn't come with a warning or a dramatic breakdown. It's quiet. So quiet that if you're not paying attention, you might miss it. But when it happens, everything starts to shift. It's the moment you finally let go. Let go of trying to fix what was never yours to fix. Let go of proving yourself to people who decided who you were before they even knew your name. Let go of trying to be good enough, nice enough, small enough to be tolerated in rooms that never had space for your full power. It happens slowly, then all at once. You stop replying to every criticism. You stop explaining your choices. You stop showing up to every battle just because you were invited. You feel the chains loosen. You feel your body exhale. And what's left in the silence is something you haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Real, grounded, unshakable peace. Because letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means remembering who you are, without the noise, without the pressure, without the need to edit yourself. You begin to realize that your life is not a performance, that your worth doesn't rise and fall based on someone else's attention span. You start to walk away from conversations that used to trigger you, not because you're avoiding the conflict, but because you're done feeding it. You see it clearly now. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every comment requires a comeback. Not every insult deserves an explanation. You stop running toward people who walk away from you. You stop holding on to connections that make you feel less just to say you have someone. You stop chasing what drains you, and you begin attracting what frees you. The more you let go, the more room you make for joy, for depth, for people who see you without needing you to shrink. You learn to sit with your own silence, to enjoy your own company, to protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. And it's in that stillness where your power starts to rebuild. It doesn't roar, It hums, a quiet, steady vibration deep within your core that says, I remember now. You remember that your life isn't about managing impressions. It's about embodying truth. You remember that the people meant for you won't need to be convinced. You remember that real connection doesn't come from perfection, it comes from presence. And most of all, you remember that you don't owe anyone access to you just because they ask for it. Letting go means choosing alignment over attachment. It means recognizing that not everything that leaves is a loss. Some things need to fall away. Some people need to go quiet. Some paths need to close so the real one can reveal itself. And that takes courage, because there's grief in letting go, even when what you're releasing was hurting you. But there's also liberation, the kind of liberation that tastes like air after being underwater for too long. You rise, you float, you breathe differently. The need to be liked, gone. The need to be understood by people who never wanted to understand you, gone. The need to constantly apologize for existing as you are, gone. You no longer beg for clarity from people who thrive on your confusion. You no longer shrink in the presence of those who can't handle your light. You no longer hold back your joy just to keep someone else comfortable in their misery. You become sovereign, not loud, not arrogant, not closed off, just whole. And when you become whole, you stop looking for other people to fill you. You no longer tolerate energy that pulls you out of alignment. You no longer compromise your peace for temporary validation. You no longer need permission to trust your own path. Letting go is the reset. It's the moment you go from chasing to choosing, from proving to becoming, from reacting to rising. And that changes everything, because the world responds differently to someone who no longer dances for approval. You speak, and your words carry weight. You enter a room, and people feel something different. Not because you're trying, but because you're finally done trying. That's the shift. That's the moment when you stop clinging to everything you thought you needed and you start aligning with what you actually are. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be seen to be worthy. You just need to be rooted in truth, in self, in stillness. And from that place, everything changes, not because the world gets easier, but because you're no longer begging it to validate you. You've outgrown the game. You've remembered your name, and you don't have to fight for a seat at any table. You are the table. When you stop caring about the wrong things, something strange happens. You start losing things. At first, it feels like collapse. People begin to fall away. Conversations grow quieter. Invitations stop coming. Some friendships fade without explanation. Certain relationships start to feel forced. You might even feel a bit like a ghost, present but invisible to the world you once bent over backwards to impress. But here's the truth. What's breaking isn't you. It's the illusion that you needed their approval to be whole. The illusion that love must be earned through self-sacrifice. The illusion that the version of you that fit in was the real you. When you stop caring, what you actually lose is everything that was never aligned with your truth in the first place. You lose the need to over-explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You lose the compulsion to show up in places where your presence is only tolerated, not celebrated. You lose the friendships that were built on convenience instead of connection. You lose the validation that kept you emotionally handcuffed to people who didn't value your depth. You lose the comfort of being liked by everyone, and you gain the clarity of being loved by the right ones. At first, it might feel like loneliness, but it's not. It's space. Space you've never allowed yourself to have. Space for silence. Space for growth. Space for alignment. Space for you. And in that space, you start to gain. First, you gain your voice, the one you buried under politeness, under fear, under the desperate need to be acceptable. Then you gain time. The hours you once spent pleasing people now poured back into your passions, your healing, your joy. Then you gain confidence, not the loud performative kind, but the quiet, unshakable kind that doesn't need to be seen to feel real. Then you gain people, the real ones, the ones who don't need you to pretend, the ones who aren't drawn to your performance, but to your presence, the ones who respect your boundaries instead of testing them, the ones who celebrate your authenticity, not just your obedience. You gain peace, the kind that doesn't fluctuate based on someone else's opinion, the kind that sits with you in silence and reminds you that you're already enough. And perhaps most importantly, you gain power. The power to walk away, to stand tall, to say no, to say yes, to choose yourself without guilt. Because caring too much kept you hostage. It made your self-worth a negotiation. It made you dependent on reactions you could never control. But letting go, that's liberation. You stop being emotionally bankrupt because you're no longer giving your energy to people who don't know how to value it. You stop overthinking because you trust your intention, not their interpretation. You stop looking for signs you belong because you belong to yourself. And when that happens, your standards rise. You no longer chase situations that make you feel small. You no longer entertain conversations that dim your spirit. You no longer apologize for being intense, emotional, driven, passionate, because you've stopped viewing your depth as a flaw. You stop settling for halfway love, for conditional friendships, for one-sided loyalty. You realize you were never too much. They were just too shallow. And now you finally see it. You weren't losing everything. You were shedding. You were releasing the weights you weren't meant to carry. You were clearing space for what's real, for what's solid, for what's sacred. You were ending the chapters where you played a role in someone else's narrative just to feel relevant. Because you've written your own story now. And in this story, you don't have to chase. You attract. You don't have to prove. You just live. You don't have to perform. You simply are. And what you gain from that is everything, not all at once, not in a dramatic transformation, but gradually, deeply, undeniably. You start waking up with less fear, less noise in your head, fewer questions about your worth, more clarity about your path, more courage in your step, more alignment in your choices. And that is the quiet reward of letting go. Not just letting go of people, but letting go of the old version of you, the one that needed to be liked to feel valuable, the one that kept score, the one that sacrificed truth for validation. That version was never your final form. It was survival. And now you're done surviving. You're ready to live fully, authentically, powerfully. That is what you gain when you stop caring, not apathy, but freedom, not isolation, but alignment, not emptiness, but real, grounded, soulful abundance. You lose the mask, and you gain your face. You lose the noise, and you gain your voice. You lose the need to please, and you gain the ability to lead. That is the cost. And that is the gift, and you will never, ever want to go back. There's a moment, quiet but irreversible, when Everything in you clicks into place. You're not louder. You're not harsher. You don't need to shout. You don't need to prove anything, because something inside you has shifted so deeply that the world begins to respond to you differently. It's not magic. It's not a trick. It's energy, a frequency, a field around you that says, I've remembered who I am. And when that happens, you become untouchable. Not because no one can reach you, but because no one can shake you. The chaos can surround you. The critics can scream. The storms can roll in. But inside, there's stillness. Inside, there's knowing. Inside, there's nothing left to lose that's worth keeping if it costs your truth. This is the moment you stop negotiating with your worth. You stop offering discounts to people who can't afford your presence. You stop bending yourself into smaller versions just to make someone else feel taller. You stand fully, powerfully, silently, and people feel it. Without a word, they sense that you no longer need to be chosen. You're not waiting for validation, not hanging your power on someone else's approval. That energy, that calm, grounded presence, is rare. And rare energy commands a different kind of attention, not from everyone, but from those who are aligned with truth, with substance, with soul. Because here's the thing, most people are loud because they're unsure. They puff up, they posture, they perform, trying to fill a void. But when you've stopped caring about performing, your presence speaks louder than any performance ever could. Your energy becomes pure, clean, whole. You don't walk into rooms hoping to be liked. You walk in with peace, and peace is magnetic. You're not trying to impress. You're trying to express. And expression, when rooted in truth, is the most powerful thing in the world. You don't speak to dominate. You speak to resonate. You don't argue to win. You stand in silence when silence says more than noise ever could. Because when you stop caring about optics, about pleasing, about performing, you operate from center, and center is unshakable. You start seeing through the noise, through the projections, through the insecurity masquerading as power. You don't take things personally anymore. You don't internalize someone else's confusion as your flaw. You don't lose sleep over gossip or opinions or digital noise. Because you know who you are. And nothing outside of you holds the pen to your story anymore, and that makes you dangerous. Dangerous to systems that depend on your self-doubt. Dangerous to people who only had access to you through your insecurity. Dangerous to narratives that required your silence to stay alive. You don't play the game anymore. You are the shift. People can feel that you're not seeking them. You're not waiting. You're not orbiting anyone's expectations. You are grounded, intentional, powerful in your restraint, unshakable in your peace. That kind of energy is rare and unforgettable. It doesn't just shift how others see you, it shifts what you tolerate, what you create, what you attract. You don't chase love anymore, you radiate it. You don't seek connection through compromise, you build it through alignment. You don't stay places just because they're familiar. You move when your soul tells you the room has shrunk, and you don't shrink to stay in rooms your spirit has already outgrown. You walk away not in bitterness, but in clarity. You choose solitude not from pain, but from power. You stop performing love. You start being love. You stop chasing success to feel worthy. You pursue meaning because you know you already are. You stop talking yourself into things that don't feel right. You trust your body, your intuition, your knowing, and that trust, That full-body trust creates a field of confidence that doesn't waver when people don't understand you. You no longer need to be understood. You need to be honest, and that honesty becomes your weapon, your armor, your peace. You stop defending yourself. You stop explaining why you left, why you changed, why you rose, because the moment you stop caring, you also stop explaining. You start embodying, and embodiment is the loudest declaration of freedom there is. You become the truth, and truth doesn't argue. Truth exists. It burns without apology. It glows without effort. It stands tall without armor. And when you carry that, when you stop caring in all the right ways, you no longer walk through life hoping to be accepted. You walk like you belong. You walk like you come home to yourself. And you have. That's what happens when you stop caring. Everything changes, not because the world suddenly gets kinder, but because you do to yourself. You stop abandoning your spirit for survival. You stop betraying your fire for comfort. You stop performing worthiness, and you simply start being. That's the moment everything changes. That's the moment you become untouchable. And from there, your life begins. Your real life. Your full life. The one you don't need permission to live. The one no one can take from you. The one that burns, shines, and echoes long after you leave the room. That's the power of no longer caring, not detachment, but liberation, not ego, but essence, not resistance, but remembrance. You remember who you are, and you never, ever forget it again.